We'll share my screen. It's become a little bit of a recurring pleasure to have Frank speak to us. I mentioned, I think I mentioned last year that his talk, some of his talks should be mandatory reading and mandatory listening for all incoming residents. And I do think that when the new crop comes, we'll have a recap of one of the talks that he gave a few years ago that really is very, very deep and educational. Frank is a fantastic neurosurgeon. He's very experienced in cranial and spinal neurosurgery. He was born in England, raised in France, speaks many languages, and moves in many different worlds with expertise and ease. But that's not to say without really high levels of skill and performance. When he's a neurosurgeon, he's a great neurosurgeon. Frank and I have been friends since I came to Sinai back in 1992. And our families became friends. Some of the very best times and trips that I have had have been with Frank. This is a very early trip to Indonesia and Bali that our families took. And as the families grew, our kids grew up together. We've had some just really incredible times around the world together. You can see some beautiful pictures here of the families relaxing here in Sardinia, with Frank always at the lead, and just a force of nature, a force for good in my life and in my family's life. Along the way, Frank and Nina became very well established art collectors. And in the recent past, they rose to really national recognition. At one point, Frank devoted himself fully to the art world, working at Gagosian and becoming almost at the very, very top of Gagosian there. And here you could see this beautiful recognition. As part of Frank's neurosurgery life and his athletic life and his art life, he travels the world in style, but his warm smile and his obvious humanity always keep him grounded. He's morphed and moved and changed with the times and has grown as life has brought changes. But I know that he's most proud of his kids, both of whom now are in the art world. Here you see a picture I showed a couple of years ago of his elder son, Max, who has become the director and head of contemporary art at Sotheby's. He's been there for 7 or 8 years now, and in a surprise to no one, has become a very, very powerful force in the art world. Well, at the same time, his younger son, Alex, has become very well-known artist in his own right. And I'm sure that it gives Frank great joy that his two sons can work together in the same field. And here you see some of Max's recognition, best known for some of his Polaroids. But somehow Frank always comes back to neurosurgery. This is an older picture from the group that he has been part of for many years, with very, very strong ties and close connections to Sinai. So today, Frank, I understand you're going to talk a little bit more about art, and we are very, very happy to have you and welcome you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Josh, for allowing me to give this talk, and thank you to the faculty. One of the most painful part of the talk is to listen to the introduction because I don't merit half of what you're saying, but I appreciate it, and thank you very much. I'm going to go on and share my screen. Keep my fingers crossed that this works. And thank you, Margaret, yesterday for helping us with this. Is this working for you? Is this working?
Yep, it looks good.
Yeah, it looks.
Okay, great. So the disclosures, obviously nothing really relevant. I did sneak in a picture of mine in the show, but short of that, everything that you see here is either most of it actually is taken at the Metropolitan Museum, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. This initial slide is a painting by Mondrian. It's done in 1942 when he moved to New York. He's of Dutch origin. My mother was Dutch, so I thought it was timely that I would put this slide up. And conceptually, towards the end of his life, he moved into an apartment where he actually painted the walls in those similar lines as you can see here, the horizontals and the verticals. He was a very spiritual being, and for him, these lines represented nature. And we may see them as just abstraction, but he could see them as the definition of a transcendental approach to nature. And so he lived in that environment. And that's something that also I will come back to a little bit later. Why art and neurosurgery? Well, you know, those are obviously two topics that I hold dear. I was listening to this little interview the other day where the announcer was stating that when they ask billionaires to come over and give them an explanation of how to become a billionaire, most of them say, well, you have to follow your passion. And the commentator said, well, you know, that's really not the case. The case is you have to follow what works for you, what you're good at, try to become as great as you can. And when you see the effect that it has around people around you, then somehow you become passionate about it. And so over time, you know, I try to focus on things that I felt I was going to be good at. Interestingly enough, both art and neurosurgery, I was lucky enough to discover when I was a teenager. So I went to medical school only to become a neurosurgeon. And as far as art was concerned, I quickly realized that I was not an artist. And so the next best thing was to collect art. And so that's with that in mind that I started to discover the world of art. It's always good to start the talk with a slide by a Greek philosopher, especially when your wife is Greek. But this one is from Aristotle. The aim of art is to represent not the outward appearance of things, but their inward significance. And I felt that as surgeons, we indeed have a unique position to understand inward significance. Josh mentioned that I did give a few talks in the past, and I started with one of them, if you remember, during the pandemic. It was really more about survival at that time. And I picked the history or the story of Shackleton. And for those of you who don't really know him, he's a captain who was on a boat that got stranded in Antarctica. And Shackleton then undertook a huge voyage, which allowed him somehow, against all odds, to save his entire crew of 27. And when the book was written about this, which the book is called Endurance, and I strongly recommend it, the traits of leadership that came through were discussed during that talk in relation to neurosurgery. And you can see how honesty, team spirit, being decisive, being inclusive, being able to delegate or improvise and overall have faith all apply extremely well to neurosurgery. At the end of the day, I think that being decisive is probably one of the traits that's the most important of all. And when listening to the talk of Dr. Steinberger, I was going to call him TV, but that doesn't work here. You can see that you really have to make a decision before you go into surgery. You have to know what you're going to do, and you have to organize that plan absolutely properly. You can't just go in there and say, I'm going to just discover it as I move along. And being decisive allows you also to have great flow, which is what the topic of my following talk was. And during that talk, what I was trying to bring up is that the flow that you have outside of the operating room will have a repercussion in the operating room. The way you put your clothes on, the way you grab a cup of coffee, the way you peel an orange, all of these things actually will have a play when you're in the operating room with your knife and your bipolar and the way you deal with things. And during that talk, I brought up this chart by the Hungarian philosopher Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And on that chart, you can see that on one axis you have the skill level, and on the other one you have the level of challenge. Well, obviously, if you're not very skilled and you don't challenge yourself very much, you're in that state of apathy, which probably is somebody sitting on a couch and watching TV all day. If your skill level is not very high, but you start challenging yourself, first you worry, and then obviously you're going to become quite anxious. Don't do the beautiful work that Dr. Pedersen did on this acoustic neuroma if you don't really know what you're going to be doing. Otherwise, the level of anxiety will be tremendous. On the other hand, if you have a high skill level and you challenge yourself, you enter this area of flow determined here in that blue arrow. And that's an area where things start to move in a different level. Even the concept of time is different. You're concentrating yourself on the task. You're very clear about the goals that you want to do. Things move easily, and you have action and awareness that are merged. So that concept of flow is something that obviously we should try to achieve, and that comes with the combination of high skill and high challenge. So this time around, I wanted to discuss neurosurgery and art. I will not be talking about the art of neurosurgery, which basically would be more of how I do it. What do I do? How do I do the best acoustic? How do I do the best spinal surgery? But rather the relationship between art and neurosurgery. Empirically, it will be divided, this talk will be divided in two parts: neurosurgery to art and art to neurosurgery. Here, we have a painting by Matisse to introduce us to this concept. The first part, neurosurgery to art, will be subdivided. As you can see, inspiration, fragility, translucency, manual dexterity, vanity, alchemy. And I try to find some sub-chapters here that are a little bit different than what would naturally come to mind. And we're going to start with inspiration. Obviously, when a painter starts, he works on a blank canvas. I mean, there's probably nothing much more daunting than this vast expanse of a canvas. In neurosurgery, when you're starting your career, you also have a vast blank canvas ahead of you. And the beauty of it is that with neurosurgery, you can actually paint a huge painting, a real fresco, something much more divine and expensive than if you had a 9-to-5 job. And so you need for this a great deal of inspiration and of learning. In the past, you had these big studios where the artist would be painting. You had the headmaster here working on his painting, and then all the other apprentices learning from mixing colors to doing certain aspects of the canvas and so forth. But what this apprentice did mainly was learn to look. And when I was lucky enough to be under the professorship of Dr. Malice, as junior residents, we were meant to be in the operating room for most of the surgeries that he was doing. On all the acoustics, he would be doing it with the chief resident, but the junior resident would be sitting in the back watching at the screen, essentially learning how to do surgery the way kids often learn how to drive, just by watching their parents from the back seat. So in that respect, if that was Dr. Malice, that would have been me here in the back doing my own notes on what was happening. So learning to look becomes a major part of learning to become a good surgeon. And you learn to look in many different ways. Once you learn to look, you can look at a painting in different ways as well. And we'll go over that in a little bit. But the other concept that is important within that big fresco of your career in neurosurgery is the concept of delayed gratification. I don't think there are too many other jobs that require as much sacrifice as becoming a neurosurgeon. And the idea of delayed gratification is pretty intense when you think of all the sacrifices that people at a very young age end up having to do in order to achieve what ultimately will be a very rewarding career. But you could spend a lot of time on just that concept of delayed gratification. What we're looking at here, though, are masterworks, right? We're not trying to paint a small painting. As in our neurosurgical career, we're looking for something that's going to be fantastic. And here, for instance, is a painting by Picasso, painted in 1937. It's called Guernica. It was painted during the Spanish War, and it is said to be one of the best paintings ever done about war and suffering and so forth. I agree with it. Actually, if you look at that character here on the right, that was me yesterday fixing a CSF leak in the operating room. So I know all about suffering and what this painting can entail. I think we all know. The next painting is by Botticelli. That was about 450 years before Guernica was painted. And here's a painting where you can learn to look also. I mean, obviously you're taken by the beauty of this painting, which is in Florence, and obviously worthwhile visiting Italy just to see that one painting in the Uffizi Palace. But here's the beauty of Venus on this oversized shell coming to shore, being blown by the couple on the left. So the male figure is supposed to be Zephyrus, the wind, the zephyr, and the woman is said to be Aura, A-U-R-A, who is also blowing a little bit and helping Venus come to shore, where she's being greeted by this minor goddess of the hours. And because of the pink flowers coming off, it is felt that she's the hour of springtime. And you can see she's holding a vestment that she's going to put around the naked Venus as she comes to ground. At some point, these trees and the wings were all beautiful green and gold, but time took its toll. And there's more to look in this painting, but essentially, you can walk past a painting like this, and you can walk past any painting, or you can take a little more time and you can study, and you can learn to look and see what it is. Fragility is the next topic, and art and neurosurgery do both deal with the concept of fragility. Here on the left, you know, the meticulous dissection that you have to do when you're doing any kind of intracranial surgery, but also, as Dr. Steinberger mentioned, the minutia that you have to do when you're trying to achieve a good preparation of the end plates to put in a cage. There is a very delicate action that comes along, and the same delicate action can be seen in the representation of these jewelry, of the vestments, the lips, the quality of the tone of the skin. All of these represent similarities. The fragility of being as well. We mentioned a little bit the toll that this long career can have on you. Well, there is a toll, obviously, in the life of neurosurgeons, and the same way as it can be the toll on the artworks themselves. As mentioned, most of these works in this talk were photographs that I took at the Metropolitan Museum, which is a place where you can learn to look if you spend the time, and it's close by, and strongly recommend visiting it over and over again. Very often in neurosurgery, we feel as fragile as this beautiful glass object. And then on the other side, we have to present like this individual here on the right side. But we are fragile, and the artworks are fragile, even though they may on the outside appear extremely beautiful and powerful. And finally, when in the concept of fragility and art, I cannot not bring up the beautiful drawings that Dr. Harvey Cushing, Professor Cushing, did during his lifetime, which allowed us all to then grasp what he was doing when he was, for instance, correcting a trigeminal neuralgia, as he was doing at that time. But if you just look at the beauty of these drawings that were done by a neurosurgeon, you realize that art and neurosurgery are intimately linked. The concept of translucency is next. And at all times, we try to see deeper into the brain, especially prior to surgery. As I said, I was working with Professor Malice, and not only did he invent the bipolar coagulation that we're using now, but he also invented a cassette that allowed angiograms to take multiple films within a couple seconds as they were injecting the dye. And when I was a resident, one of the tasks that kept me up till 2 o'clock in the morning was to put up the hundreds of films that we had to do by pair. So there was a left side and a right side, because they were taken in a slightly different angle. And in the morning when we met at 6:30 or 7 to do conference, everybody would be cross-eyed trying to reproduce a three-dimensional picture of what the case was coming up. At that time, we had a fantastic neuroradiologist, Dr. Peng Wang, who was an expert at all the blood vessels and even the smallest veins and so forth. So he would look, and for instance, he would be able to say, the way the tumor grows, I can see that that vein is going in this direction. There's a strong chance that the nerve will be indeed anterior to the tumor or posterior to the tumor. I mean, these were the things that we were able to discern, but obviously times have changed, and now we're able to use technology which allows us to see things ahead of time and to see deep into the brain and almost into the soul of these people. Artists do the same thing when it comes to translucency. They're able to paint and show us the exquisite nature of light within glass or within liquid. You can see the reflection of how it gets diffracted when it hits the water again. You can see it, how the silver aspect of it is diffracted as well into this glass. And all of this for the concept of translucency, not only of the object, but also of the soul. And here I wanted to show some of the paintings that you see in this beautiful Metropolitan Museum, a portrait by Rubens, a Velasquez painting, which strangely was just written up in the New York Times, since the painted person here is a painter in his own right that was just discovered. Beautiful painting by Icahn, but also just in unknown painters or just in marble. The fact that you can emanate the interior soul of the being through the translucency. And I cannot resist but bringing up these beautiful Dutch paintings, because they have a way with light that is just incredible. The two paintings on the side of the clouds are the painting by Ruysdael, and obviously the one in the middle is by Vermeer, where you can see the light coming in. With Vermeer, the light always comes from the left to the right. And look how it just goes up into her sleeve and through her bonnet, and then against the silver dish. And it's all about the light. And then it came to me that, ultimately when we do surgery and neurosurgery, it's all about the light as well. I mean, how much time do we focus on making sure that the microscope light is geared in the right place and in the right intensity, constantly seeking better view, better visualization, which allows us to do our work. So here again, an analogy, but analogy goes on obviously with the concept of manual dexterity. You can't not help but realize that there are less and less jobs that require great manual dexterity. And we're still lucky in neurosurgery in this era, in the time where robotics is becoming more and more prevalent, to be in a job that requires us to have great skills and manual skills. I spoke about it earlier a little bit about the flow and how the way you peel an orange affects the way you're operating in the operating room. And every opportunity that you have to work on your fingers, whether it is performing magic tricks, to doing art, or to using chopsticks, whatever it is going to eventually have an effect. And I strongly recommend to do that, whether it's in the lab or in real life. In the past, I've used, to demonstrate this manual dexterity, a little video clip of a friend and sushi chef, Noz, great place on the Upper East Side. And just actually, as we're speaking, Noz, I have to do this for Josh, is having dinner with both my boys in Tokyo right now. So it's a little blessed moment in that respect. And but this time around, I found another person to show us manual dexterity. This obviously is Picasso. The next concept was the one of vanity. And here you have a painting of Icarus falling from the sky. His father, Daedalus, the one who put together the labyrinth on the island of Crete to kind of hide the Minotaur, is looking at him, and he said, look, son, don't go up too high, because those wings that I made for both of us to escape, they were being imprisoned, are going to melt if you go too high. So here's the beautiful concept of Icarus falling from the sky, because he did go too high, and the wax that was holding the wings together melted, and he then falls to his death. That concept of vanity is something that occurs in all fields, obviously, but in fields where people have extreme power, there's going to be the possibility for extreme vanity. And so you could see it, for instance, in Jackson Pollock, one of the leading, if not the best American artist in the 50s, who thought he was just everything to everybody and didn't need to take care of anything. So he kept on living a very boisterous life and not caring too much about anything else but himself, drinking himself to a tizzy. And one evening in the Springs, up in the Hamptons, took a convertible car while he was drunk and smashed against a pole, killing a young woman in the car at the same time. So we don't want to have that crash. And as neurosurgeons, we do see things that very few people see. The beauty of the intracranial anatomy, or even the beauty of any kind of surgery under the microscope, is such that these are things that are given only to a select few. I guess, if you're an astronaut, you're going to see things that nobody else sees. But we do see things which, by the same token, we should be cautious about not becoming too vain about it, because at the end of the day, as this next video clip will show you, they are nothing else but tears in the rain. So this is from Blade Runner.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. The ships on fire on the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the darkness of 10,000 days. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears.
So, yeah, so Vanity, there you go. Tears in the rain. Remember, at the end of the day, it's probably not as great as you all want to think about it. And on other days, it's as fantastic as you want it to be. So the last subchapter here is about alchemy. And, to bring again the concept between art and neurosurgery, to me, it's amazing that an artist can take just a brush, a few paint, and a canvas, and come up with these masterworks, these incredible paintings, which, I mean, you can see my predilection for women here, but I just realized that. But that being said, it is a skill that is almost magical when you think about it. And to start with nothing and to finish with what you have here is something that's just bewildering. But by the same token, it's a little bit what we do with surgery. We take simple tools, we take a bipolar, we take a knife. You saw this morning Dr. Beddison removing this incredible tumor with really just very few things. Sure, there's technicality that comes in. You have a monitor, you have the microscope, but these are small tools. And what they do is they create alchemy. You're taking just one object and you're changing it into a better object, and remembering what the Talmudic saying, whoever saves one life saves the world's entire. If you can save one life, you can really make a difference in so many generations that come along. And then when it comes to alchemy, there's another little subset that comes to mind. It is particular to me, but I think all of us and all of you probably do it in your own way. And I like the idea that you, as a surgeon, you would remove a tumor, you would take the disease out of somebody's body, hopefully and luckily get paid for it, and then use that money to buy art. And so then suddenly you've taken something that's ugly and transformed it into something that's quite beautiful. And I think there's a certain poetry in that little moment. So the next topic, the next part is the other side of the equation, which would be art to neurosurgery. And we'll start with the skulls. In paintings, there's a tremendous amount of skulls. We see them obviously in neurosurgery, whether they're three-dimensional or not. But mainly in paintings, when you see them, like this painting of Latour and this older painting, they are meant to be what they call vanitas, so memento mori, which is a reflection of time that goes and of potential death that lurks. Like, for instance, in this painting, you can see a little wisp of smoke that will disappear. This beautiful flower, the tulip, will obviously die off, and this bubble up here is a bubble of soap that soon will pop, and that also again represents the end of our lives. A contemporary artist, Damien Hirst, took that concept to the next level, and he took a skull and embedded it with the thousands and thousands of diamonds, real diamonds actually, making it one of the most expensive skulls that you can think of. And skulls have actually invaded a little bit our culture, and over the last decades, I kind of noticed that they're pretty much everywhere, whether it's in fashion or you'll see it for yourself when you look around. And here's an object that, you know, really belongs to neurosurgeons, the actual anatomy of the skull being placed all over the world. Spines, obviously, you find them as well, and if you look for them, you can find what a beautiful spine should look like. On the left here we have Degas, in the middle a beautiful Greek sculpture. On the right, on the left was Renoir, on the right is Degas, and you can follow them if you're really looking for them. You'll find spines all over the museums, all over the painting, because actually there's a show that just opened in a little gallery that just shows people seen from the back, and so a tremendous amount of spine also in that aspect. But spine can be beautiful in spine surgery as well, and here's a case that we did where I think that you can see the beautiful realignment of this young woman, and you know that this is not a failed back syndrome, because she's a lot happier now. She's got jewelry both here and there, so this is a happy candidate. Pathology, you know, when in this painting by Monet, who was probably the father of Impressionist painting, what Impressionists did is they completely changed the way we were looking at light, basically. So prior to Impressionism, people were painting in a concept of what's called clair-obscur. So basically you were doing, to separate the planes of light, you would put a thin line, and the human being, for instance, or this tree would have been completely black and the sky completely white. But then Monet starts, and the Impressionists start by saying, no, in real life, light doesn't just stop like that. There's a margin between them, and so they start melding the light into the light, and they start creating this kind of weirdness that the first critics looking at it said, well, come on, this is not a bridge. This is just an impression of a bridge. When Monet did the bridge in London, so that's where the term impressionniste came by. But if you look at this concept, I always was bewildered to see that it really kind of mimics a little bit what we see in the pathology slides. So here again, a little wink between art and neurosurgery, and that's true even in more modern paintings. On the left, a painting by Joan Mitchell. On the right, another pathology slide, or even more recent, a photograph that was at a MoMA not that long ago of Tillmans, and on the right, this photo micrographs of dendrites. So once again, the parallel between these two elements of art and neurosurgery. And somehow also, I felt that there was a relationship when you look at those individuals that are represented in the paintings. They each have a character, and when the painting is successful, you really kind of gather the impression of who they are and what they are. And also the way Dr. Steinberger brought up earlier, that some patients you shouldn't really deal with, so you should learn how to deal with them. the same thing applies to every day's visit with a new patient, where you have to use a little bit of your own ESP in order to understand who they actually are, what are they going to want. And I think you'll avoid a lot of failed surgery if you do that. So it's worth looking at those portraits, learning a little bit, trying to identify what character traits come through. The painter has very minimal time and space to convey an emotion, so everything is very charged, and it's worth looking and taking the time. The object isn't to make art, it's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable, by Robert Henry. So that reminds me a little bit of that concept of Mondrian, whose apartment was filled with his own lines of transcendental colors. Also reminds me a little bit of that aspect of the flow that that requires high skill and high challenges. So essentially trying to be in that state which makes us into better surgeons, better beings. And in conclusion, I would like to emphasize those few points. Probably the first one is one of the most important ones as far as learning how to observe. There is no day that you shouldn't be surprised by something that you look at, or you shouldn't be curious, because there's just so much to learn on every single opportunity. But once you stop observing and you think that you're just projecting, I think you're going to miss out on so many things. Remaining creative, we just, saw so many slides of art, but bringing that same energy of creation into everyday's neurosurgical practice makes it a lot more interesting. And obviously we are doing it because the way neurosurgery is practiced today is very different than what it was when I started. Remaining active, it goes without saying. I think it also goes back to that concept of being decisive. You really have to make decisions. You have to keep on moving. And the last two, remain in a state of wonder and learn through awareness. They come back again to that concept that if your entire life is lived in a state of wonder, then things come a lot easier, basically. And it's not always easy to achieve when you're limited in a small operating room and you have constraints all around you. But if you take the time to look at the clouds, look at the art, and try to capture all of these energies, I think you'll be a better surgeon and you'll serve your patients that much better. Thank you.
It's too bad we're not in the same room to hear the applause, Frank, but it's such a beautiful talk, so inspiring. I have the feeling there are not going to be too many comments because people are taking in the profound observations you've made. But if anyone has anything to say, anyone want to share any reaction to it? Trevor?
Hi, Dr. Betterson. It's Ted.
Yeah.
Frank, so amazing talk. And what I wanted to focus on and ask for your advice is, I remember how much of a struggle it is as a junior resident watching other people operate and spending hours in the operating room thinking, I'm not getting my shot. When am I going to get trained? When am I going to actually get to do this? And your stress on the fact of how much you can learn by watching did not really sink in for me until I became an attending and realized how much you can see when Dr. Betterson is doing a surgery, now that I know what to look for. What advice would you give to encourage the young surgeons coming through this field that are going through this part of residency, where they really need to learn a lot by watching? How do they keep this going and not get frustrated?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've been there before. I'm not saying it's easy, but we are overall entering a state, where everything goes a lot faster. and there's this quickening that goes around us, and everybody wants to do everything at the same time. I would just say that use the operating room and the fact that you have to wait and watch for a long period of time as an opportunity to challenge yourself and learn the skill within the challenge to be patient and to take the time to understand what's happening. If you're not faced with these moments where things get potentially boring or potentially uninteresting, then you're just like a chicken running around without a head. So you really want to understand that you're in a place that's not so much fun, and you're watching somebody else operate and you're frustrated. But then that's the moment to observe within yourself and say, okay, you know what? I'm just going to use this opportunity to just stay quiet, because if you cannot be quiet during that period of time, it's going to affect you later when you have to do surgeries for hours and hours on end. I mean, being a neurosurgeon is not about, operating fast or operating a lot. It's about operating well. And you can only do that if you take your time, basically.
Wonderful. It looks like Trevor, you have your hand up, so go ahead.
Hi, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Moore. It was a great talk. In the realm of connecting art and neurosurgery together, you briefly mentioned robotics, but I wanted to get your thoughts on the explosion of AI that's coming out. So you can generate these AI paintings of anything that you may want, and I wondered how that might influence some of the things that you see in the art world, and we're already hearing people talk about how it's going to impact medicine and neurosurgery. So I'd love to get your thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're entering, as everybody knows, a new era. Even though we think that we've advanced a lot in the last, 100 years, if you think about it, we're still driving the same similar cars. With a lot of the stuff that we're doing is still very much what it was 100 years ago. And people say, oh, they're waiting for changes to happen within 2 years, and everybody is disappointed. But 10 years later, the changes really occur. I think this time around with AI, I think we're going to see some major changes. Yeah. When it comes to art, and as a collector, I'm obviously a little, let's say, a little concerned about it in one way, because it means that everybody can have a copy of a Van Gogh painting or whatever impression they want on their walls. But then comes in purely as a collecting aspect, the concept of scarcity, which is a very important concept in collecting. And that's true in any type of collecting. So if anybody collects sneakers or NFTs, or the idea of scarcity, of owning something that nobody else does, is very special. And the more there will be of multiplicity of paintings that are easily rendered by AI, maybe having the original piece is going to be even more important. So I'm not too sure. And I'm talking now more about the financial value of things. As far as the cultural aspect, it goes both ways. On one side, it's great for people to be able to express themselves and have access to great art at their fingertips. On the other side, if everybody can be an artist, is it going to destroy the world of the real artists who, go through the whole concept of delayed gratification? What AI does, it takes away delayed gratification. It gives you immediate results. I'm not sure what the answer is. If you get back to me 10 years from now, I think we'll probably have a much better idea.
Terrific. Any other comments or questions for Frank? Well, if not, we'll close it out. It was a wonderful experience as usual. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.